Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a future Europe, shaped not by the battles of yesterday, but by a radical, almost utopian vision. A world where traditional notions of nobility, race, and even work are completely redefined, all in an ambitious effort to overcome some of humanity's oldest struggles. Sounds wild, right?
Absolutely. Today, we're diving deep into a truly thought-provoking and at times controversial text, Richard Nicholas Coudenhove-Kalergi's Practical Idealism, first published back in 1925.
Kalergi, right? A pretty prominent figure. Considered a father of the pan-European movement by many.
That's him. But this philosophical treatise, it goes far beyond just political union. He's really outlining a complete reimagination of human society.
So our mission today is to explore Kalergi's intricate blueprint for European civilization. We want to meticulously extract and explain his concepts, nobility, technology, pacifism, just as he laid them out.
Exactly.
We're not here to endorse or refute any of it. The goal is really to offer you a shortcut to understanding this pivotal, though definitely complex, piece of historical thought.
And Kalergi's book, it's fundamentally structured around three main sections: nobility, then apology of technology, and finally, pacifism.
Yeah.
He uses these pillars, to construct his argument for a complete societal and human transformation. It moves from philosophical foundations right through to practical applications. It's a really sweeping vision of progress.
But as you said, sometimes rooted in perspectives that can feel, well, quite jarring to a modern ear.
Definitely jarring at times.
So as we explore his ideas, some surprisingly prescient, others, frankly, deeply unsettling, we want you to consider how these early 20th century ideals resonate or clash with our world today. This is where Kalergi's vision becomes particularly provocative, I think. All right, so Kalergi kicks off his entire philosophy with a really stark statement, creating this fundamental division right from the start. He says, practical idealism is heroism, practical materialism is eudaimonism. He's drawing a very clear line in the sand, isn't he?
He certainly is. It's a foundational concept for him. Kalergi argues that idealism requires a fundamental belief in higher values, something that transcends just, pleasure and pain.
Right.
For an idealist, there are things worth fighting for, even suffering for, that go beyond immediate gratification or comfort.
Okay, so that's idealism and practical materialism.
That, by contrast, acknowledges only pleasure as a value and pain as an evil. It prioritizes comfort, self-interest above all else. And for Kalergi, this is the core philosophical divide that has really shaped human history.
And he really emphasizes this isn't about believing in gods necessarily, but about believing in values. He even makes this bold comparison to Epicureans and Stoics, saying this divide is much greater than that between theists and atheists.
Exactly. So it's about a commitment to a moral or ethical framework, whether or not there's a divine one involved. That's the key difference for him.
So idealism drives great works, even if it's messy.
That's his argument. Kalergi suggests that while idealism is often problematic, he admits it can be entangled with nonsense and insanity, but humanity's greatest works and deeds ultimately stem from it.
What?
The profound insight here, I think, is Kalergi's belief that humanity's progress isn't driven by pure logic or comfort-seeking. It's driven by an often irrational faith in something bigger.
And materialism, though.
Materialism, on the other hand, while he sees it as unconditional, he also views it as fundamentally unimaginative and uncreative. It lacks that crucial driving force for, grand achievements or leaps forward.
That's a powerful claim.
Yeah.
And he links this heroism directly to the aristocratic ideal, doesn't he? Contrasting it with materialism and the democratic ideal.
He does. He believes political democracy, because it values numbers more than in value, more in luck than in greatness, needs something more. It needs to constantly generate a new aristocracy of mind and ethos.
An aristocracy of mind. So moving toward what he calls a spiritual democracy, where noble spirit replaces noble name, rich heart replaces rich pocket.
Precisely. It's about elevating the standard. He even cites Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, as a kind of prophet of this intellectual aristocracy and also a socialist economy. Kalergi sees both of these as forms of practical idealism.
So this isn't just about political structures then, it's deeper.
Much deeper. It's about the very essence of human aspiration and societal leadership being rooted in an intellectual and ethical elite, which of course is a concept that directly challenges many modern notions of pure egalitarianism.
Okay. Now, Kalergi doesn't just talk about idealism in general terms. He actually differentiates between a Southern and a Northern idealism. He says, ascetic idealism of the South manifested itself in religion, while the heroic idealism of the North in technology. What's this about nature in the North being a challenge Europeans accepted and fought?
Right. Kalergi attributes this distinction largely to climate and geography. His thinking is that the harsh, cold environment of the North forced Europeans into this constant battle against nature, just for survival. This relentless struggle, he argues, systematically bred over time a hard, energetic, and heroic human race. While other groups might have succumbed or migrated south, Europeans, in his view, accepted this challenge. They became masters over the earth.
So that shifted the ideal from enduring suffering to active struggle.
Yes, that's how he frames it. Fighting for an ideal became greater than merely enduring suffering for one. The focus shifted from passive diversion to active struggle and mastery.
And this battle against northern nature, this culminates in the technological age for Europe. And that's where the worker comes in as the new hero. Is that the idea?
Yes, exactly. Kalergi declares that the worker is the hero of our age. His opposite is not the citizen, but the freeloader. It's a stark contrast.
The worker creates, the freeloader consumes. Simple as that.
Pretty much. And therefore, he concludes, technology is modern heroism, and the worker is a practical idealist. This completely redefines heroism, shifting it away from martial prowess or conquest towards productive output and innovation. It's a profound reevaluation of societal worth.
So, thinking about his time, Kalergi sees the 20th century challenge as catching up with the technological progress of the 19th century. What does this actually mean for humanity in his view?
Well, he issues a really stark warning here, and it's one that feels incredibly resonant even today. Kalergi believes technology develops at a much, much faster pace than humanity itself evolves ethically, psychologically.
Right. We see that tension now.
Definitely. And this imbalance, he cautions, will either lead to destructive catastrophes. He points directly to World War I as a clear warning sign of this imbalance, or alternatively, to an unprecedented political development that entirely leaves past models behind.
So, a stark choice.
Yeah. Humanity, in his eyes, faces a critical choice. Essentially, suicide or agreement, meaning conscious adaptation or self-destruction through the misuse of its own creations.
Wow. And he even goes so far as to declare that war is beginning to play its historical role. Its successor is work. He envisions a future where every war will be a civil war and every kill a murder. That's quite the shift from the traditional heroic ideal.
It's a radical reinterpretation, absolutely.
Demanding optimism of the will to defeat pessimism of knowledge.
For Kalergi, the immense energy previously channeled into warfare must now be directed towards productive labor and technological mastery over nature. The really profound insight here is his belief that humanity's primary conflict should no longer be with itself, but with the natural world, in order to create a better existence for everyone.
But it requires belief, right? A proactive fight.
Yes, a profound belief in this future and an active, almost heroic fight to achieve it, overcoming any doubts or resignation rooted in past failures or present realities.
Okay, so having explored Kalergi's fundamental divide between idealism and materialism and this whole idea of heroism, he then turns to the environments that he believes shaped human character and destiny. It's this stark dichotomy between country and city. He calls them the two poles of human existence and says they produce distinct rural and urban people who are basically psychological opposites. That's a powerful statement.
He truly believes this is a fundamental divide, yeah. Kalergi observes that farmers from different regions, even different countries, often resemble each other more emotionally than they do people in a neighboring city.
Interesting.
He sees time itself as separating city and farm. Rural areas embody older ages. He mentions everything from the Stone Age up to the Middle Ages, while the metropolises represent modern civilization.
So the core idea is that environment shapes psychology.
Yes, the core insight is Kalergi's argument that geography and environment aren't just passive backdrops. They are active shapers of our very psychology, our worldview, or character.
And these contrasting environments create radically different psychological profiles, don't they? He says the urbanite is abstract, mechanical, rational, often skeptical, critical, focused on society, living with machines, seeking independence from nature.
Precisely. And in stark contrast, the rural man is characterized as concrete, organic, irrational, often emotional, religious, superstitious. His life is centered on nature, living in symbiosis with the animal, and completely dependent on weather and seasons.
It's a fundamental difference in how they perceive and interact with the world.
Absolutely. which leads to distinct systems of belief and morality.
He also attributes different core beliefs to them. The rural man, he says, believes in the force of nature over man, while the urban man believes in the force of man over nature. One finds purpose in the cosmos, the other finds it in humanity. This seems to feed directly into his ideas about progress.
It does, very directly. Kalergi states unequivocally that the rural man is conservative as nature itself, while the urban man is progressive as society. He goes on to conclude that all progress is based on cities and city people.
All progress. That's quite a claim.
It is. The city dweller, he argues, is often the result of a revolution within a generation, someone who has broken with rural traditions to embrace a new urban existence. The insight here is Kalergi's firm conviction that urbanization is the engine of human advancement. It's a crucible where new ideas and societal structures are forged.
It's interesting how he frames art here, too. He suggests cities offer art theater, concerts, galleries as sort of surrogates for the eternal and changing beauty of the landscape, providing beauty in concentrated form after work.
Yeah, whereas in the country, art is almost redundant because nature is the extensive, art the intensive manifestation of beauty. It highlights this urban compensatory mechanism, right? Creating concentrated aesthetic experiences to make up for a perceived loss.
And he connects morality to the city, too.
He does. He argues that social, Christian moral is an urban phenomenon, directly tied to human coexistence and the density of society. The city dweller, he notes, combines this Christian morality with his irreligious skepticism, rationalistic materialism, and mechanical atheism, which for Kalergi ultimately leads to socialism, the modern religion of the modern city.
Wow. And he controversially views Christianity itself
as little more than a reinterpretation of paganism for the rural barbarians of Europe, suggesting its initial appeal was more about recontextualizing existing beliefs for that population than something entirely new.
So, despite all these stark differences, Kalergi recognizes a strange kind of interdependence, doesn't he? He notes that rural and urban people, despite deep mistrust and often veiled or open hostility, really rely on each other.
They absolutely do. Cities draw strength from the country, and the country draws culture from the city. The country is the soil, the source for renewal, feeding the cities.
While the city drives culture and progress.
That's right. He sees it as a symbiotic, if often antagonistic, relationship. The country acts as the eternal foundation, providing renewal and essential resources, while the city is the engine of cultural and societal progress, intellectual ferment, and innovation. He even delves into specific archetypes to illustrate this divide, particularly in Germany, the Junker and the Reiter.
Ah, yes, the Junker. Embodying noble will, maximum of character with a minimum of intellect. Typically an officer mistrusting modern things, and in Kalergi's view, despising Jewish writers specifically.
And the Reiter, embodying noble spirit, maximum of intellect with a minimum of character, typically a journalist, progressive, skeptical, versatile. These are stark caricatures, but he uses them to make a point.
He calls them born rivals and enemies.
He does. He attributes much of the hatred and division in Germany at the time to this fundamental misunderstanding, where each side only perceived the shadowy side of the other, the negative stereotypes.
And this had real consequences.
He claims it did. This mutual misjudgment, he argues, led to critical errors in military and revolutionary strategy, ultimately contributing, in his view, to Germany losing both the war and the revolution. The insight here is Kalergi's assertion that these deeply ingrained cultural archetypes and their mutual mistrust can have tangible, devastating political and societal consequences.
But he also suggests that while the middle classes diverge the most, the upper classes are closer, maybe even identical. He sees the distinguished gentleman, the peak of blood aristocracy, and the genius, the peak of mind aristocracy, as compatible. He even cites figures like Caesar and Goethe.
Right, suggesting they can even be related. The ideal aristocrat, then, for Kalergi, combines both will and mind. This is a crucial point that leads into his later vision of a new synthetic nobility.
Okay. And he introduces the gentleman and bohemian as cultural expressions of this, products of European blood and mind nobility trying to escape bourgeois life.
Exactly. The gentleman he associates with England, Roman Stoicism, classic Apollonian ideals, escape through style, idealizing wealth, conservative, focused on the physical, psychological.
And the bohemian, linked to France, Greek agora, romantic, Dionysian, escape through temperament, idealizing poverty, revolutionary, focused on the spiritual.
Kalergi then laments that Imperial Germany, lacking the freedom and, as he puts it, crystallization atmosphere of England and France, couldn't develop such organic ideals. Instead, he argues, Germany looked to poetry and created these romantic but untimely or out-of-sync ideals. The Prussian officer, he calls him a mechanical Siegfried, and the German scholar a mechanical Faust.
Mechanical Siegfried and Faust. Harsh.
It is. He calls for a revision of German ideals, moving beyond the purely militaristic and the purely scientific, towards a poet-thinker ideal. He sees figures like Otto von Bismarck, the hero of action, and Goethe, the hero of mind, as embodying the synthesis he's looking for.
Okay, so building on these different human types shaped by environment, Kalergi presents a quite direct, almost biological argument for their origins. He says the rural man is a product of inbreeding, and the urban man is a mixed breed. That's blunt.
It is blunt, yes. He suggests that inbreeding, which he saw as common in sparsely populated rural areas and also within isolated upper classes, leads to physical, psychological, and mental similarities across generations.
And this strengthens certain traits.
In his view, yes. Traits like loyalty, piety, sense of family and caste, consistency, stubbornness, vigor, closed-mindedness. But it also results in more prejudices, less objectivity, and a narrow horizon. It's conservation in place of evolution, creating what he calls a one-soul person.
Okay, a one-soul person, and the urban mixed breeds.
In contrast, he views these as products of various races and classes meeting in cities. He argues that in these individuals, the conflicting traits, prejudices, inhibitions of diverse ancestors are often eliminated, or at least weakened.
Leading, he
claims, to objectivity, versatility, mental restlessness, freedom from prejudices, and a broader horizon. But there's a downside, too, potentially a lack of character, lack of inhibitions, weakness of will, inconsistency, impiety, and disloyalty.
So more adaptable, but maybe less grounded.
That's the idea. Each generation for Kalergi is a variation, signifying either evolution or degeneration. He calls them multi-soul persons.
Multi-soul, okay. He also talks about a tension between wisdom and action, doesn't he?
Yes, he notes that wisdom inhibits action, action denies wisdom. The wise person, by seeing all sides objectively, can have their impulsive will weakened the will needed for decisive action.
So only the biased are effective.
That's his controversial take. Only biased, single-minded people are truly effective agents of change. He does differentiate, though, between unconscious, naive narrow-mindedness and a conscious, heroic narrow-mindedness, where great figures temporarily switch off parts of their awareness to achieve a specific goal.
Right, so Kalergi sees this trade-off. Favorable inbreeding strengthens character, but might limit the mind, while miscegenation strengthens the mind, but can weaken character. The optimum combination is what he's really after, right? Favorable inbreeding and race mixing result in the highest human type, combining the strongest character with the sharpest of minds.
Precisely. And this is what leads him to a truly bold and frankly quite controversial prediction about what he calls the man of the future.
Okay, what's the prediction?
Kalergi states unequivocally that the man of the future will be a mixed breed. He actually envisions a future Eurasian-Negroid race, similar, he says, to the ancient Egyptians, which will replace national diversity with a diversity of personalities.
Wow. Eurasian-Negroid race. Replacing nations with personalities.
Yeah. He attributes this to heredity laws. Virality of ancestors yields variety in descendants. The really radical insight, or perhaps assertion, here is Kalergi's optimism that humanity can actively engineer its own evolution, overcoming these divisions to create a higher human type through controlled mixing.
That's a lot. And he even identifies predecessors for this planetary race.
He does. He points to the Russian people, describing them as a Slavic, Tatarian, and Finnish mixed breed as a typical multi-soul person with a wide, encompassing soul, a kind of prototype.
And the opposite?
His strongest opposite, Kalergi claims, is the isolated Brit, described as a highly inbred one-soul person whose strength lies in character and will, embodied by his archetype of the gentleman. Hashtag 2.2 paganism, Christianity, and the role of Judaism. Now, shifting to another fundamental duality in his philosophy, Kalergi identifies paganism and Christianity as these two types of souls that compete for world domination. He clarifies, though, that their connection to the actual religious denominations is often superficial.
Right, so it's more about underlying values. He calls Buddhism ultra-Christianity and Americanism, modernized paganism.
Exactly. He's talking about deeper ethical priorities. Paganism, he says, prioritizes energy, while Christianity prioritizes love, the Christian ideal, the loving saint, the pagan ideal, the victorious hero.
And their goals for humanity differ too.
Radically. Christianity, for him, seeks to tame man. He uses the Latin homo ferus, wild man, to homo domesticus, domesticated man, while paganism wants to make man superhuman, like transforming a cat into a tiger, is his analogy.
He points to Tolstoy as the herald of modern Christianity and Nietzsche as the preacher of modern paganism. And he sees old Germanic religion living on in chivalry and modern ideologies.
Yes, specifically imperialist and militaristic ideology. For Kalergi, figures like officers, junkers, colonists, and captains of industry are the leading representatives of modern-day paganism. He then links these soul types back to cultural development and environment.
Okay, how so? He argues that rural barbarianism and inbreeding favored the development of a pagan civilization, and race mixing the development of a Christian mentality.
Right. He sees pagan individualism as suitable for sparsely populated areas where self-reliance is key. Christian or socialist principles, on the other hand, are cosmopolitan products more suited for overpopulated areas where cooperation is necessary.
And he connects it to cultural age. Paganism is a symptom of cultural youth. Christianity a symptom of cultural age.
Yeah, noting that older cultures like Chinese and Jewish are, in his ethical sense, more Christians than the Germanic nations. This brings us to where Kalergi offers a quite specific and, for many, very controversial perspective on Judaism within this grand historical narrative.
Okay, let's tread carefully here. What does he say?
Kalergi positions them, in his text, as an ethical religious conqueror of the ancient world, primarily through Christianity. He asserts that as far as Europe is Christian or moral, it is, in an ethical spiritual sense, Jewish.
He claims almost the whole of European ethics is rooted in Judaism.
That's what he writes, yes. And that Jewish prophets prepared a new world epoch where ethics are primary in all things: politics, religion, philosophy, and art.
And he sees Jewish unique greatness in this ethical attitude, but also a danger.
Yes. The danger he identifies is that Jews who lose their faith in ethics to fall into cynical egoism. And what separates Jews from average urban citizens, in Kalergi's specific view, is their status as an inbred people, leading to a combination of strength of character combined with sharp intellect.
Which predestines them for leadership.
That's his claim, predestining the most excellent specimen of the Jews to become leaders of humanity, either false or real spiritual aristocrats. Now, it is absolutely crucial to remember as we discuss these points that these are Kalergi's controversial views as expressed in his 1925 text, Practical Idealism. This is not an endorsement from us of any group or ideology.
Right. We're just reporting what he wrote.
Precisely. We are conveying Kalergi's interpretation of history and societal roles as he presented them. He goes on to assert that, in his view, European persecution acted as a kind of artificial natural selection, which raised the leading nation of the future by eliminating the weak-willed and unintelligent among Jews.
Leading to?
Resulting, he claims, in a small community that was hardened by the heroic martyrdom for an idea and purified of all weaknesses. He concludes, quite strikingly, that this nation, the descendants of ghetto prisoners, is becoming the aristocrats of the mind in Europe.
He also lists prominent figures like Einstein, Mahler, Bergson, Trotsky as examples owing their position to superior mind. And how does he frame anti-Semitism?
Kalergi characterizes anti-Semitism as one of many reactions of the ordinary against the extraordinary, essentially a struggle of quantity versus quality. He frames it as a reaction against what he perceives as intellectual and ethical superiority.
He also delves into the complexity of Jewish identity itself, doesn't he? Both mixed and inbred.
Yes. He notes they are paradoxically both the most mixed blood, as an international religious community, and subject to the most inbreeding, due to historical separation. He acknowledges what he describes as potential downsides, combining defects of inbreeding with the defects of race mixing, a lack of character mixed with closed-mindedness,
and physical traits.
He mentions a potential hypertrophy of the brain at the expense of body and nervous system, leading, in his view, to physical and nervous weakness, a lack in physical courage, and insecurity in performance, which he deems incompatible with the knightly ideal.
But he sees a solution.
Kalergi believes, in his work, that making Jews more rural, a main goal of Zionism, combined with physical education, will free the Jews from any residual of the ghetto. Again, it's vital to stress these are Kalergi's specific and often highly controversial historical and anthropological claims from his text, presented solely for the purpose of understanding his particular perspective from that era. Hashtag 2.3, the crisis of nobility and the rise of plutocracy.
Okay. Moving beyond these archetypes and historical analyses, Kalergi views the democratic age of his time as a kind of miserable interlude. an interlude between two great aristocratic eras, the old feudal aristocracy of the sword and a future social aristocracy of the mind.
That's his framing, and he argues that democracy in this interim period is effectively ruled by the pseudo-aristocracy of money, what we'd call plutocracy.
And he traces the decline of the old feudal nobility. How did that happen in his view?
He points to key technological and social shifts. The invention of gunpowder, he says, ended knightly rule on the battlefield. The printing press ushered in the potential for intellectual rule. Then absolutism, the rise of centralized monarchies, which he sees as the victory of city power over rural power, further weakened the blood nobility.
How so?
By drawing them into resplendent servitude at court. They lost, he argues, their character, freedom, pride, leadership by becoming courtiers. He also blames urbanization and exaggerated inbreeding for their physical and mental decay, noting that English nobility largely avoided this, which helped preserve some of its vitality, in his opinion.
And it wasn't just the blood nobility that fell into crisis, right? He says intellectual nobility also suffered.
Yes, Germany's academic nobility, for instance, who were once liberal pioneers, had in his view become a mainstay of the reactionaries, advocating things like militarism, nationalism, anti-Semitism, alcoholism, which he dismisses contemptuously as slogans in the fight against the mind.
And the journalists, the intelligentsia.
He claims the journalistic intelligentsia betrayed its leadership mission by becoming a slave of capital. Their character broken, he says, by defending strangers' interests. Their spirit trivialized by the demands of overproduction and sensationalism.
So Kalergi's take is that institutions meant for enlightenment, like schools and the press, actually became tools of an unintellectual intelligentsia.
That's his bleak assessment. And with the decline of both blood and mind nobility, Kalergi identifies plutocracy as seizing power. He rather pointedly calls democracy a facade of plutocracy, where statesmen are puppets, the capitalists are the puppeteers.
So birth doesn't matter anymore. Only income determines rank.
That's his observation of the time. This plutocracy, he argues, is even mightier than yesterday's aristocracy because the state itself has become its tool. That's a stark warning about the power of concentrated economic influence over politics.
Kalergi offers a particularly sharp critique of plutocracy. What are its core flaws in his view? What really bothers him about it?
His core critique is ethical and cultural. He argues plutocracy lacks a sense of responsibility, culture, and tradition, unlike what he idealized in true blood nobility, and ultimately has no higher worth than money and luxury.
But doesn't he see any virtues in entrepreneurs?
He acknowledges they possess virtues like drive, prudence, cleverness. But Kalergi argues it's fundamentally unfair that they wield more social power than those in what he calls ideal professions. Artists, scholars, doctors, people serving ideal and social goals.
So the fundamental evil is
favoring egoistical and materialistic prowess over altruistic and idealistic contributions. Plutocracy, he concludes, might be an aristocracy in its sense of energy and intellect, but it's a pseudo-aristocracy in an ethical and spiritual sense. It lacks the moral core.
And he sees it decaying already.
Yes, he observes its decay even then. Sons and grandsons of the original Moguls often slack off in luxury and idleness. He also highlights a new plutocracy of dealers emerging from the economic booms around the war, displacing genuine businessmen in his eyes.
Dealers as opposed to builders.
Exactly. These dealers, he says, are painicites. Their wealth based on luck and ruthlessness rather than strong will and mind. This dealer plutocracy, he concludes scathingly, resembles more a kakistocracy rule by the wells of character than an aristocracy of great skill.
Ouch. And this leads to a loss of authority.
In his analysis, a complete loss of moral authority. Kalergi argues capitalism is compromised and no aristocracy can last without moral authority. Lacking aesthetic and ethical culture, plutocracy inevitably creates hate and contempt, and if he doesn't empathize, she must fall.
And the Russian Revolution is a sign of this.
For him, yes. He sees it as the beginning of the end for this historical era. He even remarks, somewhat cynically, that the revolution softened plutocrats' hearts more than Christ's gospel ever did, highlighting the disruptive power of social upheaval when moral appeals fail. Hashtag 2.4, the future nobility and erotic eugenics.
Okay, so this critique of the present leads us to Kalergi's vision for a future nobility. How does he define this new nobility?
He defines nobility not by birth or wealth, but by inherent qualities. Physical, spiritual, and mental beauty. Beauty of complete harmony and spiritual energy. It's an idealistic definition.
And he believes this future nobility will draw from the best of both worlds, right? If they're uncorrupt.
Yeah. That's the idea. He envisions a reconciliation of these seemingly opposed forces: character and spirit, junker and writer, rural and urban, pagan and Christian. He wants to synthesize them to create a new revolutionary aristocracy.
And he talks about hereditary political talent.
Yes, he makes the claim that high nobility over generations developed specific diplomatic talents and the art of ruling. He argues that political talent can be awakened and nursed, not learned, suggesting there is an innate component.
So strong bloodlines offer something unique.
He suggests these hereditary political talents from strong bloodlines can counteract the negative results of inbreeding sometimes found in lower aristocrats. He even uses pairs like Vladimir Lenin and Erich Ludendorff, or Gustav von Kahr, referred to as Adler, and the revolutionary Anton Arco as examples. He sees them as having similarly strong characters shaped by different environments, arguing that character runs deeper than intellectual convictions.
Now, building on his earlier controversial assessment of Judaism's unique intellectual and ethical legacy, Kalergi then proposes how this heritage positions them directly within his vision for this future, synthetic nobility. How does he connect those dots?
Okay, again, stating clearly this is Kalergi's argument. He reiterates his claim that Jews are predestined through their intellectual superiority to be a main influence on future aristocrats. He goes further, seeing them as the central womb from which a new intellectual nobility arises, the core around which a new intellectual nobility is grouped.
So an intellectual urban master race forming.
That's the term he uses, envisioning it forming from this synthesis process. It's a very specific and charged concept in his writing.
So his ultimate vision is for a synthetic aristocrat who will be neither feudal nor Jewish, neither bourgeois nor proletarian. He will be synthetic. The old categories disappear.
Yes. The races and classes of today will disappear. The personalities will remain. This then leads Kalergi to perhaps one of his most radical and certainly most unsettling proposals for actively shaping this future nobility, a concept he calls erotic eugenics.
Erotic eugenics. That sounds intense. What does he mean?
It's a truly audacious proposal for social engineering, frankly. Kalergi envisions a future where the most important men will attract the most beautiful women, and the most important women will attract the most perfect men. This process, a kind of natural selection of human perfection, he believes, will replace the artificial selection based on birth, feudalism, or wealth, capitalism.
So mating based on perceived quality.
That's the core idea. He sees socialism, which starts by leveling society, eventually peaking in the breeding of nobility and differentiation of humanity. He actually considers this its highest mission.
Leading from inequality through equality to a new kind of inequality.
Yes, from unfair inequality through equality to equal inequality, over the ruins of all pseudo-aristocracy to a real new nobility. That's the path he lays out. His motto for this future encapsulates the synthesis. Ethics is the soul of our culture technology, its body. Mens sana in corpore sano, which is Latin for a healthy mind in a healthy body.
All right, shifting to a second major pillar now, technology. Kalergi argues, quite provocatively, that culture has turned Europe into an insane asylum and the majority of people into forced laborers. That's a pretty grim assessment of culture itself. What's his reasoning behind such a strong claim?
He draws a very stark comparison. He states that a European factory worker's life in his time is actually more miserable than that of an animal living in the wild, and even more pitiful than domestic animals because of a profound lack of freedom.
More miserable than a wild animal.
He contrasts this with his idealized image of prehistoric man, whom he describes as a happy being, a happy animal, living in complete freedom in tropical nature, playing instead of work. This prehistoric human, he imagines, was beautiful and happy, possessing courage and his joy, greater than any pain.
So humanity somehow lost this delicious free existence, became unnatural, ugly, unfree, unhealthy.
That's his narrative. He says the state robs him of any freedom, and the harsh climate forces him to work his entire life just to survive. He directly links development to growing freedom, arguing that external pressure and force inhibit it. A free human is beautiful and happy, and most humans are ugly because through this loss of freedom, they are stunted and degenerate.
And what drove humanity out of this paradise, according to Kalergi?
He identifies two main forces, overpopulation and the migration into cold climates. Overpopulation, he says, caused the loss of the freedom of space, leading to what he calls slavery to society. Migration to the north caused the loss of the freedom of time, his leisure, resulting in slavery to northern nature and the necessity of forced labor.
He literally calls society and climate the two tyrants of the cultured European.
He does, and he emphasizes their profound, inescapable impact. He talks about the intense social bondage and metropolizes the overpopulation, the hustle, the constant rules and regulations. This social unfreedom is less severe in sparsely populated areas, he notes.
And the climate.
Climatic unfreedom is most oppressive in northern civilized nations, forcing people into ceaseless work just to fight off hunger and cold. He concludes that Europe is an overpopulated northern strip of land. Therefore, the European is the most unfree man, a slave to society and nature. It's a rather bleak assessment of the modern European condition in his time.
But he sees humanity trying to get back to paradise. He outlines 4 historical liberation attempts.
Yes, 4 main strategies humanity has employed, in his view.
Trying to get back to privacy and sun through migrations, colonization, and wars for space and warmth.
Escaping the hustle by climbing into the seclusion, freedom, and leisure of the top 10,000, basically, making others work for you.
An inward path involving self-control, sacrifice, scaling back, needs to fit the harsh realities of overpopulated, cold climates, think religious movements, asceticism, and 4th, technology. The forward path, the victory of human spirit over nature, which he believes can lead to a new era of freedom and leisure. And 4th, technology. Hashtag 3.2, the ethics technology imperative.
And this brings us directly to his ethics technology imperative. Kalergi frames Europe's entire cultural destiny as answering this fundamental question. How will it be possible to protect mankind living on a narrow, cold, and barren strip of land from famine, hypothermia, homicide, and exhaustion, and give to it the freedom and leisure that once gave it happiness and beauty?
And his answer is?
Unequivocal. Through the development of ethics and technology, these two forces working together.
So ethics fostered through schools, the press. Religion is meant to transform humans from predator into a domestic animal, making them fit for a free society. Well, technology provides the means. Free time and energy through increased productivity and through operating machines instead of hard labor.
Exactly. Ethics solves the problems from within, changing human nature. Technology solves them from without, changing the external conditions.
And he's skeptical about politics solving this alone.
Very skeptical. He argues politics alone cannot make people happy or rich and will ultimately fail in solving the social question. Politics can only equalize the evil, not cancel it. At best, it might turn Europe into a penitentiary of equal slaves, but not a paradise.
So the state and forced labor are necessary evils for now.
Yes, the coercive state and organized forced labor, he asserts, are not ideals, but social and climatic necessities which are unbearable. They grant European survival through lifelong forced labor, but at the cost of freedom.
But the ideals are anarchy and leisure.
He presents anarchy, meaning a state-free existence, and leisure, abundant free time, as the true ideals, yes. But he immediately adds the caveat, they are not possible in a densely populated society which does not have high ethical standards. Because their premature realization, without the necessary ethical foundation, would lead to chaos, universal murder and theft, or mass death by starvation or hypothermia. Society isn't ready.
So how do we overcome the state and forced labor then?
Kalergi insists it can only be done through ethics and technology, not through political revolution alone. The state's ultimate mission, for him, is to make itself unnecessary through the cultivation of ethics, leading eventually to cultural anarchy.
And labor's mission?
Labor's mission is to make itself unnecessary through technology, leading to cultural leisure. It's a progressive, almost evolutionary path towards a utopian future, driven by this dual advancement of internal ethics and external mastery over nature.
He traces this cultural spiral idea, right? From natural anarchy to state, then ethics, then cultural anarchy, and natural leisure to forced labor, then technology, then cultural leisure.
Exactly. And he sees modern Europeans as stuck in the center of these curves. They are, in his words, no longer animal but not yet human, caught in the transition.
And ethics and technology are fundamentally linked, sisters.
Yes, he calls them sisters, both conquering nature through formative spirit. Ethics conquers the microcosm, the inward world, the human soul. Technology conquers the macrocosm, the outward world, physical nature. And both are absolutely essential, he pointedly asks. What good are morals if humanity starves and freezes? What good is technological progress if humans misuse it to slaughter and maim one another?
Right, they have to advance together.
That's the core insight. His holistic view is that these two forces must advance in tandem for any true sustainable human progress. Hashtag 3.3 Asia, Europe, and technology's world mission.
Now, connecting this to a grander global scale, Kalergi makes another strong distinction. Asia's greatness lies in its ethics, Europe's greatness in its technology. He calls Asia a teacher-master of self-control and Europe a teacher-master in the mastery over nature.
This distinction is absolutely crucial to his worldview. He sees Asia as focused on harmony, tranquil, inward calm, feminine, static, Apollonian in its ideals. Europe, by contrast, is focused on energy-active, outward, moving, determined, masculine, animalistic, dynamic, Dionysian. He even uses alpha and omega as symbols for this eternal east-west dualism.
And again, he attributes these differing souls primarily to climate. Warm Asia as a child friend of nature, cold Europe as a master opponent of nature, forced to wrest everything he needs to live.
Yes, very strongly. He claims that winter has systematically eradicated weak, passive, sluggish, and bred a hard, energetic, and heroic human race in Europe. He concludes quite dramatically that the white man is the son of winter.
That's a deterministic view. He also observes historical conquest patterns based on this.
He does. The active, heroic North, he notes, has always tended to conquer the passive South militarily. But the more cultured South often culturally assimilates the barbaric Northerners over time. Most military conquests flow north to south, while spiritual and religious influence tends to move south to north. He even cites Europe being conquered religiously by Judaism via Christianity and militarily by Germanic tribes.
He even categorizes religions by climate: contemplative, heroic, harmonious.
He does, linking contemplative types like Buddhism to India's heat, heroic types like Nietzsche or the Eddas to Europe's cold, and harmonious types like Confucianism or Apollo to China's temperate climate. It's a very schematic view of cultural origins.
Now, Kalergi gives the European spirit this mythical identity, comparing it to Lucifer and Prometheus. What does that signify for him? Why those figures?
It's a really potent metaphor for what he sees as Europe's core essence: the relentless will to change and improve the world through action. It's characterized by constant emancipation, reformation, revolution. He views Europe as the light bringer who carries the divine spark to earth, but also as rebellious against heavenly Asian harmony. Europe is the prince of the world, the father of battle, of technology, of enlightenment, and of progress.
And Greece is the precursor.
Yes, he sees ancient Greece as Europe's precursor, discovering its activist rationalist soul, overthrowing kings and gods in favor of the state of the citizen and the religion of man.
So for Kalergi, technology isn't just a tool for progress. It's the very foundation of modern Europe's identity and its driving force in the world. It defines Europe.
Absolutely. He goes into detail about how technology awoke Europe from her sleeping beauty slumber of the Middle Ages.
How so?
Gunpowder defeated knighthood and feudalism, dismantling old power structures. The printing press defeated the dominance of the papacy and superstition, empowering the intellectual leader of the masses. The compass and advanced ship technology opened up and conquered new worlds, driving global exploration and colonization.
And science.
Art. The telescope and microscope revolutionized science, fundamentally expanding human knowledge. Even modern art forms, he argues, like music, architecture, theater, photography, are deeply influenced by technology, pushing painting, for example, towards more inward expression.
And politics and economics.
Politically and economically, he sees democracy, nationalism, industrialism, capitalism, and socialism all as direct consequences of technological progress. Industrialism, in particular, creates a socialist mentality in his view, and this has fundamentally changed Europeans themselves, making them more rushed and nervous, less settled, more awake, alert, rational, active, practical, and smarter.
So he concludes with this very strong statement: Europe owes its cultural advantage to technology. Only through technology has Europe become the master and leader of the world. Europe is a function of technology. America is an escalation of Europe.
It's a defining statement for him. He sees technology as a pivotal turning point, comparable only to the discovery of fire, fundamentally dividing history into pre- and post-technological ages. He considers Europeans the fathers of the technological world change, who will eventually be praised as saviors for this transformation.
A cultural tangent.
Yes, he frames Europe as a cultural tangent that disrupted the cyclical nature of Asian culture, introducing radically unknown life forms of thought and action. Its technological culture is truly something new. He cites Leonardo da Vinci with his passion for technology and human flight, and Francis Bacon with his utopian New Atlantis based on technological inventions as pioneers who truly sensed the meaning of Europe.
And the contrast between More's utopia and Bacon's New Atlantis.
For Kalergi, that contrast marks the crucial shift from Middle-Age Asian thinking, focused on ethics like More, to modern-age European thinking, focused on technology like Bacon. It highlights the core of what he sees as Europe's unique defining mission.
Kalergi views human existence as this constant fight for freedom and power, which has led humanity to conquer the animal, plant, and mineral kingdoms and natural forces. He breaks this struggle down into three historical phases: hunting, war, and work. Tell us about those.
Right. Hunting, he says, was the first phase. This is where humans gained domination over the animal world through their superior mind and developing weapons. The goal was both protection and enslavement, taming animals for use. He compares this primal struggle to Rome's conquest of the ancient world.
Okay, first hunting. Then,
man moved to fight his fellow man. War became a special form of hunting, and slavery, in his view, was akin to animal husbandry applied to conquered peoples. This constant conflict, he argues, sharpened both the human mind and manpower, pushing human evolution forward through struggle.
until hunting and war weren't enough.
Exactly. Eventually, as populations grew and resources shifted, hunting and war alone couldn't sustain humanity. So, the Age of Work began. Work, for Kalergi, then became a special form of war, and technology, in turn, became a special form of slavery. But this time, it's natural forces that are being dominated and harnessed for human needs.
So Kalergi argues that war, which was once a necessary phase of development, has now become an anachronism in this new age of work. What does this transition really mean for humanity?
He asserts that war, in the modern technological age, is simply a dangerous destroyer of culture. True progress is marked by inventions, not military victories. Modern war, for him, is fundamentally a civil war amongst fellow workers, a completely self-defeating act that hinders the real goal.
So glorifying war is outdated.
Yes. Kalergi believes the glorification of war is as untimely as the glorification of hunting in the era of war. The true hero is no longer the commander or the dragon slayer, but the inventor.
And work, especially technological work, is the new battlefield.
That's the metaphor. In this era of work, agriculture is defensive, merely sustaining life. But technology is offensive. It actively attacks nature's limitations. Humans now rule steam, electricity, and an army of machines, fighting not just hunger and cold, but actively tackling the barriers of time, space, and gravity. Technology, born from that European spirit, does not obey the will of nature, but dominates it. The core insight is this complete redefinition of heroism, moving from destroying other humans to creating progress, from fighting each other to mastering nature.
All right, so Kalergi paints this picture of Europe having achieved technological might, but he also paints a stark picture of Europe's mass misery at the time, despite these advances. What's the core issue causing this misery, according to him?
He believes Europeans have essentially pushed back the ghosts of famine and hypothermia, but at the price of his freedom and leisure. It's a terrible trade-off in his view. He argues that forced labor, in effect, starts at age 7 with schooling and typically ends only with death.
So it consumes life.
Yes. Poisoning childhood, devouring time, personality, and vitality. Leisure, for the common person, is effectively punished by the death penalty. If you don't work, you starve. He argues the average European in his time faces an unbearable choice: work yourself to exhaustion or face death from need.
And he examines two political attempts to fix this state: colonial policy and socialism. Let's start with colonial policy.
For colonial policy, he describes conquest and settlement in thinly populated areas, mainly as a way to deal with overpopulation emigration as a provisional solution, and the exploitation of warmer areas, and particularly colored peoples, as essentially robbery and slavery used to prop up European prosperity.
But he doesn't see this as sustainable.
No, he predicts it will ultimately fail due to an enormous revolt of slaves and their eventual expulsion of European powers. He saw the writing on the wall there.
Okay, and his critique of socialism. It aims to distribute workload and earnings more evenly, right?
Yes. Socialism aims to exercise the European hell through even distribution of the workload and earnings. However, Kalergi argues that without a massive boom in technology, simply redistributing the existing misery won't eliminate it. It can only alleviate it slightly.
So even fair distribution isn't enough.
Not in his view. Even equal distribution would result in too much work and too little pay for everyone. He claims socialism fundamentally misjudges the European problem. It sees unfair distribution as the main issue, when the real issue for Kalergi is insufficient production relative to the population and climate. Winter and overpopulation, he says bluntly, are harder and crueler despots than all the capitalists.
So Kalergi asserts Europe must choose between two paths: either decimate its population and commit suicide, or to recover through greatly increasing production and perfecting technology. Technology, then, is framed as a kind of war.
Exactly. A liberation war against the hardest, cruelest, and most uncharitable tyrant. Nordic nature. That's the real enemy to be conquered.
And he uses this analogy of a technological army.
Yes, it's a compelling analogy he uses to illustrate this technological war. Industrial workers are the frontline soldiers. Engineers, entrepreneurs, managers are the officers. Inventors are the general staff. Machines are the artillery. Mines are the trenches, and factories are the forts. This global army, he says, mobilizes the entire planet to break the tyranny of Mother Nature.
Kalergi uses the conquest of electricity as a powerful example of this. How does he illustrate technology's victory there?
He explains how lightning, which was once this deadly, terrifying foe that threatened, wounded, and killed people, was first neutralized by inventions like the lightning rod. But then it was actively tamed and harnessed, turned into an indispensable and most useful servant.
Doing work for us.
Right. Performing work like lighting rooms, cooking food, ironing clothes, powering trains, driving machines, work that, he calculates, would require double the human hours available globally. For Kalergi, this is the perfect model for subduing all potentially hostile natural forces, transforming deadly predators into useful pets, threats into tools for liberation.
And he elevates the inventor almost above the saint.
He does. He argues the inventor is often a greater benefactor of humanity than the saint. He cites examples: the automobile, saving countless horses from brutal labor, or rickshaw operators; diphtheria antitoxin, saving children's lives; ship technology, freeing galley slaves; petroleum heating, freeing fire stokers from hellish conditions.
And he speculates about future inventions.
Yes, he provocatively suggests an inventor finding a cheap coal substitute would save millions from mine labor, and a chemist making wood edible would end famine entirely. His conclusion is stark. Neither ethics, nor art, nor religion, nor politics will wipe out the biblical curse of labor, but technology.
He even suggests salvation might come not by politics, but by technology, not by a revolutionary, but by an inventor.
Exactly. Possibly some unnamed individual who will free humanity from famine, frost, and forced labor by unlocking new, unimagined energy sources. It really highlights his profound, almost religious belief in the redemptive power of scientific ingenuity.
Kalergi also makes a pretty radical claim about the foundation of all past cultures. He says every previous culture was based on slavery. The ancient on slaves, the medieval on serfs, the modern on the working class. Is that right?
That's his assertion. He argues this exploitation provided the necessary freedom and leisure for the ruling classes, the lords, the elite, to actually develop culture, art, philosophy.
But the modern age, with its Christian social ideas, faced a dilemma.
Yes. Renounce culture, which requires leisure, or maintain slavery in some form. He argues Western Europe chose the latter. Slavery remained, but disguised in industrial labor. Russia, in his view at the time, by attempting to liberate labor completely, was sacrificing its entire culture. Both outcomes, he says, are unbearable.
So Kalergi believes technology offers the ultimate escape route from this dilemma. How so? What's the machine's role?
He outlines the ultimate goal of technology as completely replacing human slave labor with machine work. This would elevate all of humanity to a kind of leisure class served by an army of natural forces captured in machines.
How would that work?
Machines increase production vastly while reducing the need for human labor, thus ending both material need and the need for economic slavery. Crucially, machines perform the repetitive mechanical work, leaving humans free for organic, intellectual, and individual tasks.
So work itself changes.
Yes, work becomes more like play, sports, and free creative activity, stimulating rather than dulling the human spirit. The profound insight here is his vision of technology not as a dehumanizing force, which is a common fear, but as the ultimate liberator, the very thing that could pave the way for a truly universal, cultured existence for all people.
And he sees the machine having another cultural mission, too, dismantling the big city.
Yes, a third cultural mission, the dissolution of the modern metropolis and the return of man to nature. He envisions a future where fast transport and communication technologies allow workers to live far away from their physical workplaces.
In garden cities.
Exactly. Living in garden cities with healthy air and spacious rooms, commuting quickly when needed. He paints a picture of future cities centered around a huge skyscraper, which will include all public and private offices and dining hall, surrounded by the low houses and wide gardens. Factories would become like central cathedrals of work, separate from living areas.
So he really disliked contemporary cities.
He anticipates a time when people will marvel at how his generation endured the big cities, citing their unhealthy atmosphere and how they poisoned body, soul, and spirit. Urban culture for him is a marsh plant born by degenerate, morbid, and decadent people. Strong words.
He then uses the millionaire's life as a model.
Yes, he sees the modern millionaire's life enjoying luxury, comfort, beauty, freedom from climate, overpopulation, hunger, frost as a kind of cultural paradise. They are lord of nature, served by technology's invisible, mighty servants and spirits.
And this can be for everyone.
He believes this exceptional today can become the rule tomorrow through more technical progress. He argues technology has busted the gates of paradise open for all, potentially. Just as past luxuries like glass windows or books became commonplace, so too can cars, villas, telephones, and beyond.
So the goal isn't leveling down.
No, quite the opposite. He stresses it is the cultural goal of technology to offer to all people the opportunities in life that today are available to those millionaires. Technology fights necessity, not against wealth, against bondage, not against domination. The ultimate goal, he claims boldly, is wealth, power, leisure, beauty, and happiness for everyone. Not proletarianization, but aristocratization of humanity. Hashtag 4.3, the imperative of heroic pacifism.
Kalergi stresses that this future paradise won't be achieved by political coups or revolutions, but fundamentally by work. How does this connect to his concept of heroic pacifism? It sounds like a contradiction.
It does, but he explains it. He states that the spirit of the technological age is heroic pacifistic. Heroic because technology is war with a changed weapon. Pacifist because the battle is not directed against people, but against nature.
Okay, so the heroism is in the fight against nature, not other humans.
Precisely. The technological hero works, thinks, acts, and dares, not seeking to take the life of his fellow man, but to release him from the slavery of hunger, cold, distress, and forced labor. This creative, productive work is a form of asceticism, self-control, and self-sacrifice, a hard sacrifice made for future generations. It transforms the traditional idea of heroic courage.
And laziness is the enemy.
He views laziness as the greatest vice in the age of technology, comparing it directly to cowardice in the age of war. The struggle of life against death is a struggle of energy against inertia. The flying man conquering gravity becomes a symbol of overcoming this inertia.
He finds beauty in technology itself, the machine.
Yes, he argues that the flying machine, the automobile, the motorboat, all possess a unique dynamic beauty that must be appreciated aesthetically. The machine symbolizes the overcoming of matter by the mind, liberating humanity through action.
And cinema. He sees that as important.
He sees cinema as a powerful new art form and a tool for mass education. He thinks it implicitly proclaims a new gospel of power and beauty, urging be strong to men and be beautiful to women by constantly showing the victory of the strongest man and the most beautiful woman. It's an interesting take on early film's cultural impact.
Now here, Kalergi makes some rather controversial claims about the emancipation of women and Asians, linking it to masculinization.
Yes, this is another area where his views are very much of their time and quite challenging today. He describes the emancipation movements as symptoms of the masculinization of our world, leading, in his view, to the triumph of what he terms the man-woman and the yellow European over the true Oriental. He suggests that for progress, women and Asians must adopt European or masculine traits and methods first. Only after achieving progress through these means can they perhaps return to what he sees as their innate feminine or Asian harmony later. It's a hierarchical and assimilationist view.
He also thinks European ethics misunderstood technology because of his Christian Asian origins.
Yes, he believes the traditional ethical frameworks didn't properly value the struggle and mastery involved in technology. He credits Nietzsche's perspective for helping see technology's fight against nature as inherently good and noble.
And a new work honor replaces knightly honor.
That's the idea. Inventors become the new objects of hero worship. This new ethic, he believes, will adopt pacifism and socialism from Christianity, not for their own sake, but because they are useful tools for enabling technological progress and the necessary cooperation it requires.
But he identifies a Buddhist danger. What is he warning against here? What does
Right.
that mean?
Kalergi views what he calls pacifist and hostile propaganda against the technological and industrial development, citing examples like Tolstoyans or neo-Buddhists who advocate simpler living as fundamentally treason against Europe's mission.
Treason, strong word.
Very. He sees it as a call for surrender to nature, a retreat to primitiveness, which would suffocate technology and with it, the spirit of Europe. He insists Europe must reject this influence and remain true to its core heroism and rationalism to fulfill its unique destiny.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, Kalergi reflects on the decade after World War I. He calls it a worse indictment against the war than pacifists could ever issue, yet war was still being celebrated.
Yes, and he warns starkly that the next European war would utterly destroy it. He saw the danger clearly.
And he analyzes why pacifism failed in 1914.
He attributes its powerlessness to a crucial difference. Many people wished for peace, but very few were willing to actively fight for it. He claims war broke out because determined war-friendly minorities were able to prevail against disorganized anti-war majorities. Peace requires more than just hoping for it.
He identifies several key mistakes of pacifism then.
He does. He critiques it for being non-political, too detached from reality based on illusions, for being boundless, wanting everything at once and achieving nothing, for being far-sighted in goals but lacking reasonable means, leaving the present to the militarists, for being haphazard, wanting to prevent war without offering a replacement system, for being splintered into sects with no unified church, for being merely an appendage to domestic politics rather than a primary focus, and for being inconsequential, easily abandoned for some perceived higher ideal.
He differentiates between religious and political pacifism.
Yes. Religious pacifism focuses on war being immoral and aims to change people. Political pacifism sees war as unprofitable or stupid and aims to change situations. Kalergi says they should support each other, but practical political pacifism must emancipate itself from ethical pacifism. It needs to learn pragmatic, even ruthless, Machiavellian methods from the militarists in order to actually win.
So, fight fire with fire, in a sense.
That's the implication. He states bluntly, whoever throws his weapon away in the name of nonviolence helps only the robbers. Europe, he argues, cannot wait centuries for people's hearts to change. Peace needs to win soon, using effective political strategies.
So Kalergi calls for a new pacifism. What does this practical Machiavellian pacifism look like?
It demands leaders who are statesmen instead of dreamers, fighters instead of complainers. They must be optimists of the will, but pessimists of knowledge, meaning believe in the goal, but be realistic about the challenges.
What else?
Limit goals, achieve them step by step, don't try for everything at once. Unified leadership and common symbols are crucial cooperation, not necessarily merging all groups. Voters must demand clarity from politicians on the fundamental issue of war and peace. And crucially, pacifists must be willing to sacrifice honor, money, and life for their cause.
They need to be braver than the warmongers.
Yes, they need to prove greater heroic courage than those who glorify war. This new pacifism is not passive resignation. It's an active, strategic, and potentially costly fight for peace. Hashtag tag 4.4 geopolitical challenges and pan-Europa.
Okay, thinking geopolitically, Kalergi categorizes three types of war: offensive, defensive, and liberation. All pacifists oppose conquest or offensive war, that's clear. But liberation wars pose a dilemma, right?
They do. He points out that pacifism making liberation wars impossible effectively sides with oppressors. But legitimizing them opens the door for cynical powers to launch wars of conquest under the false pretext of liberation. He ultimately deems a pacifism that permits a war of liberation as practically illusory because feelings of oppression are so widespread and subjective, it's too easily manipulated.
He contrasts the pacifism of Geneva, League of Nations, with Moscow, Soviet influence.
Yes. He sees Geneva's conservative pacifism aiming to maintain the existing status quo and fight peacebreakers. Moscow's revolutionary pacifism, on the other hand, sought to accelerate international upheaval to bring about a future communist peace. Kalergi feared Geneva was too weak to enforce peace, while Moscow was too radical and disruptive.
So he proposes a middle way.
He proposes an evolutionary pacifism that would gradually erode national and social oppression while maintaining peace a difficult path, a narrow rope over a double abyss, he calls it.
He also identifies specific global flashpoints, the Indian and the Australian question.
Yes, difficult peace problems involving, in his view, the potential unity of Asian peoples against British rule in India and the lockout of the Mongols, as he terms it, from Anglo-Saxon settlements, particularly in Australia. He saw these as potential sources of major violent conflict in the future.
But his focus remains on Europe.
Primarily. Kalergi argues European pacifists might lack the power to pacify the entire globe, but they do have the power to give permanent peace to Europe by solving the European question, and crucially, preventing European involvement in distant Asian or Pacific conflicts.
And European peace issues are solvable in his view.
Yes, he believes European peace issues are relatively easy to solve. No insurmountable obstacle stands in the way, which is quite an optimistic statement.
What are the main threats to European peace he identifies?
Two main ones. First, the border issue. Most European states were dissatisfied with their borders after WWI, but peaceful change seemed impossible. He argues a change of the borders would eliminate old injustices, but put new ones in their place. His solution: don't change the borders, just make them irrelevant, turning it off through a customs union and minority protection.
And the second threat?
The Russian question. He sees Russia as a vast world power aiming to violently overthrow the existing European system. He believed it supported social irredenta, disaffected socialist groups, within European nations, and was preparing an army for a potential war against the West.
So, facing these threats, Kalergi proposes his famous Pan-Europa program as the solution. What does this program actually entail?
It has three core interconnected goals aimed at securing peace. First, securing inter-European peace. This involves creating pan-European institutions, an arbitration agreement, a mutual guarantee pact, a customs union to dissolve economic borders, and robust minority protection laws.
Okay, peace within Europe. Second,
securing peace with Russia. This requires a pan-European defensive alliance for leverage, but also pursuing mutual recognition, strict non-interference in internal affairs, border guarantees, joint disarmament talks, economic cooperation, and importantly, reducing social oppression within Europe to lessen Russia's ideological appeal.
And third, looking beyond Europe and Russia.
Third, securing peace with Britain, America, and East Asia. This involves establishing arbitration agreements and undertaking a regional reform of the League of Nations to make it more effective globally.
And if diplomacy with Russia fails, he advocates military strength.
Yes, he argues that if Europe cannot persuade Russia to accept peace, it must be prepared to force them into peace through clear military superiority. This superiority should be achieved, however, through a pan-European defense alliance, not through a nationalistic arms race.
It's a kind of peace through strength argument.
It is. He states, if one neighbor is peaceful, the other warlike, pacifism demands that military superiority be on the side of peace. For Kalergi, disarmament is only possible after the idea of peace has already triumphed politically and militarily. You secure peace first, then disarm.
He also stresses the link between domestic and foreign policy.
Critically, he argues that oppression at home, whether national or social, inevitably sows the seeds of foreign conflict. Therefore, a peaceful foreign policy fundamentally requires a liberal domestic policy that respects rights and minimizes grievances.
And promoting cooperation is key.
Absolutely. Pacifists must actively promote international cooperation and understanding, support institutions like the League of Nations, combat hate speech in the media, promote translations of literature, encourage student exchanges, tourism, anything that builds bridges.
He even suggests a common language.
Yes, Kalergi proposes an international common language suggesting Esperanto or English to foster direct understanding. He favors English due to its existing international role even then.
And the focus should be on enlightenment.
Ultimately, yes. Peace propaganda should focus on enlightenment and the fight against human ignorance, rather than just appealing to charity or emotion. Because, as he puts it, human beliefs change faster than human instincts. Enlightenment ended witch-burning and slavery, he argues. Enlightenment will eventually end war.
Okay, as we approach the end of his vision, Kalergi sees two overriding demands for his age: expansion of the worker state and preparation of the culture state. What's the difference between these two states?
He explains that the first demand, the worker state, is about putting politics in the service of technology. Its goal is maximum production, efficiency, conquering necessity. The second demand, the culture state, puts politics in the service of ethics. Its focus is on human development, well-being, achieving that higher cultural level.
And he talks about a shift in class structure.
Yeah.
From social to temporal.
Yes, it's an interesting idea. He argues humanity's classes are shifting from social divisions, rich, poor, noble, commoner, to temporal ones. He says, we are not the slaves of our contemporaries, but of our grandchildren.
Meaning we work for the future.
Exactly. He views the overwork of his generation as building up capital, technological, cultural, ethical for future generations to enjoy. He calls it a kind of worship of children that replaces the ancestor worship found in some Eastern cultures. It's about long-term societal investment.
This leads him to the idea of mandatory labor. The expansion of the labor state is seen as a cultural obligation.
Yes, where nobody has the right to leisure as long as collective needs haven't been fully met by technology. He actually cites the Austrian philosopher and economist Popper Lynkeus and his idea of replacing mandatory military service with mandatory labor service.
To ensure a subsistence for all.
Right, ensure basic subsistence for everyone, and in doing so, eliminate the fundamental basis for class differences stemming from economic necessity.
But he thinks this mandatory aspect won't always be needed,
Yeah.
at least for Europeans.
He believes so. While universal mandatory labor might be needed initially, Kalergi thinks Europeans and Americans, being inherently restless due to their climate-forged nature, would likely continue to work voluntarily even without coercion, simply out of a need for action, not just greed or boredom.
He points to millionaires still working.
Yes, and retirees often suffering from forced leisure. It suggests an inherent drive to be active and productive. And within this labor state, he again positions inventors as the most important personalities of our time. Industrial workers are their pillars. He argues inventors should be granted a privileged position with state support, allowing them to invent without material worries, recognizing their absolutely crucial role in building this future. Hashtag 5.2, from producer to consumer state.
Kalergi emphasizes the need to raise general prosperity primarily by increasing production, not through confiscation or mere redistribution. And he makes this key distinction between a producer state and a consumer state. What's the critical difference there from his perspective?
He argues that hunger and material shortages only truly cease when supply consistently exceeds demand. In capitalism, which he sees as a producer state, production is fundamentally driven by pricing and profit motives.
Which can lead to problems.
Yes. Producers, he notes, might actually destroy products or deliberately inhibit new, more efficient technology if it benefits their profits or protects their existing market share. He gives the hypothetical example of a revolutionary bread substitute being sabotaged by the established bread industry to maintain prices. This system, he argues, can perpetuate need artificially.
And producers and consumers have different goals.
Fundamentally divergent desires, yes. Producers generally want higher prices, while consumers want lower prices, which usually comes from increased production and efficiency. He also criticizes advertisement as a mischief of the producer state, arguing it fosters envy and dissatisfaction by creating artificial desires rather than meeting genuine needs. The core insight is that the motivation behind production fundamentally shapes the entire society.
So Kalergi proposes that the culture state of the future will be a consumer state. What does that mean?
It means production will ultimately be controlled by consumers or their representatives, oriented towards general welfare and culture, not towards maximizing private profit. He even suggests Parliament's future mission will be to represent consumer interests above all else, shifting the entire economic paradigm away from producer dominance towards collective well-being.
But he warns Europe needs to be careful about how it transitions, unlike Russia.
Very careful. He warns that any overthrow of Europe's economy must meticulously protect the existing base of production and technology. Russia's destructive revolutionary methods, he argues, were catastrophic because Europe, unlike vast Russia, simply cannot survive even a temporary standstill in production.
The consequences would be too severe.
He states starkly 100 million Europeans would starve to death. He admonishes readers. Anyone who willfully kills a human being sins against the Holy Spirit of the community. Anyone who willfully destroys a machine sins against the Holy Spirit of labor.
Wow, putting destroying a machine on par with killing a person.
Ethically, in the context of survival, yes. It highlights the absolute sanctity he places on both human life and the productive capacity needed to sustain it in Europe's specific conditions. Russia's revolution, he says, showed the danger of ignoring technological needs, forcing its leaders eventually to ask capitalist enemies for help against the unforgiving climate. Europe must avoid this tragic fate because, as he puts it, the heartbeat of Europe is technology. Without technology, it cannot live. Hashtag 5.3 dangers and the romanticism of the future. But Kalergi isn't just a techno-optimist. He clearly warns of the profound dangers of technology separated from ethics, World War I, he states repeatedly, was the horrifying proof that technological advances without corresponding ethical progress inevitably lead to catastrophes.
So Europe's collapse is inevitable if its ethical progress does not keep pace with its technological.
That's his stark warning. Ethics and technology must advance together.
He uses the powerful image of the Janus-headed machine. What does this symbolize for Kalergi? Two faces.
Exactly. It symbolizes technology's fundamental dual nature. If handled responsibly, guided by ethics, the machine is like a helpful slave girl, providing power, freedom, leisure, culture. But if handled irresponsibly, driven by materialism alone, it enslaves humanity, reducing people to mere components of the machine.
Dehumanizing them.
Yes. Technology without ethics, which he equates with practical materialism, transforms humans into machines, causing them to lose their soul. Kalergi stresses that technology ultimately, like art or science or politics, is not an end in itself. It's merely a way to lead to humanity a strong, complete human. That's the true purpose.
Okay. He then says that his age, despite its hardship, has its own kind of romanticism, the romance of the future, which consoles people by looking for a golden tomorrow. Who represents this for him?
He identifies Karl Marx, the prophet of the future worker state and world empire of labor, and Friedrich Nietzsche, the prophet of the superhuman and a coming world culture, as the key romantics of the future.
Why?
Because they place paradise not in a nostalgic past or some distant, abstract realm, but squarely in the future. These are dynamic ideals, he says, that compel people, turning their eyes forward, making them act as creators of society and of men. They inspire action towards a future goal.
And the ultimate ideal of this European romanticism of the future
is not turning away, but returning to nature on a higher level. It's not a rejection of technology, but using technology and ethics to achieve a new harmony. After millennia of war against nature and each other, humanity will finally make peace with nature, but not as her subjugated creature, rather as her master. It's about achieving an enlightened stewardship.
And Kalergi ends with this powerful final image, doesn't he? Speaking of humanity finally reaching for the crown of creation, the free, evolved human being as king of the earth.
Yes, it's a grand, almost messianic vision, and his dedication at the very end of the book reads simply, "To the dead, living, coming heroes of peace." A final flourish on his sweeping, ambitious, and often deeply unsettling vision for humanity's future. #outro.
So what does this all mean? Kalergi's Practical Idealism is, well, it's a remarkable and deeply complex work, isn't it? It's clearly a call to action, urging the Europe of his time to embrace this heroic technological destiny, to completely redefine nobility, and to actively construct a future based on conscious, deliberate choices rather than just passively accepting fate or tradition.
Absolutely. He weaves together history, philosophy, social commentary, and this really quite radical vision for human evolution that, as we've definitely explored, challenges so many conventional understandings of society, race, progress, you name it.
What really stands out to you, having gone through it?
I think it's Kalergi's relentless, almost obsessive pursuit of an ideal future. Even if the paths he proposes to get there are often stark and certainly controversial from our perspective today, his profound belief in the transformative power of both ethics and technology working in tandem, that's key. And this core notion that the man of the future must be a new, synthesized type, consciously created, it demonstrates such a grand ambition to overcome what he saw as society's and nature's limitations.
Yeah, there's this constant call for a proactive, almost heroic will to shape destiny, isn't there? No passivity allowed.
Exactly.
And Kalergi's text, written almost a century ago now, it really offers a fascinating, if sometimes uncomfortable, lens through which to consider our own world. His concerns about overpopulation, the role and dangers of technology, the search for lasting peace. These are still incredibly relevant debates, aren't they?
They really are. It makes you wonder what points of his vision maybe unintentionally have come to pass, and which parts remain firmly in the realm of speculative, maybe even dangerous fiction.
It definitely leaves you thinking.
And Kalergi asserts something quite striking. That humans finally learned to fly after hundreds of thousands of years was much more wonderful and unlikely than one day learning to live in peace with one another. But given his complex and often deeply contradictory path towards achieving that peace through things like erotic eugenics, a synthetic nobility, and a Machiavellian pacifism, it leaves us with a really important, maybe unsettling question for today.
Which is?
In our own pursuit of a better future, driven by our own technologies and ethical frameworks, how much of our present humanity are we willing to re-engineer? And what might the unforeseen costs of that project be?
A lot to think about, isn't it? We certainly hope this deep dive into Kalergi's practical idealism has given you plenty to ponder.
Hopefully illuminating even the difficult parts.
Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep learning.